Who doesn't love a good underdog story? The story of the underdog has been told so many times over the course of professional wrestling. Sometimes it's been done really well, and sometimes it's kind of crapped the bed. This is the underdog story. When you think of classic underdogs, you think of guys who you never thought you would ever see rise to the occasion to become the biggest stars in the industry. Now, there have been times where professional wrestling companies have built their entire promotion at one point around the underdog. And today, I'm going to highlight 3 examples of classic underdog. The first talent I'm going to highlight is one of my favorite talents in the history of wrestling and one of the more underrated talents in wrestling, Mikey Whipwreck. Now, a lot of you people may have seen Mikey Whipwreck on WCW television, where he was a cruiserweight. But if that's the only exposure you've ever had to Mikey Whipwreck, you haven't seen anything of what Mikey Whipwreck can do. Mikey Whipwreck started in Paul Heyman's ECW. Well, in ECW, Mikey Whipwreck was setting up rings and just wanting to get a spot. When Paul Heyman once saw him practicing front flips and moonsaults after setting up a ring one day, somewhere in his mind, an idea sprouted for the ultimate loser. Mikey had then become known as the guy who took the most brutal beatings from all of the top ECW stars. Mikey got beat up so bad that the ECW faithful, who were normally so bloodthirsty, actually started cheering for him. And while Mikey Whipwreck didn't do anything in the ring except get beat up, the fans just wanted to see more from Mikey. But Paul Heyman played up the Mikey Whipwreck underdog story so well. As a matter of fact, his theme song was Loser by Beck. Mikey was good at one thing, and it was losing. And the ECW fans had pretty much seemed to have thought that that was the only thing that Mikey Whipwreck could do. Except on one fateful night where Cactus Jack needed a tag team partner, and lo and behold, he teamed with Mikey Whipwreck. After a brutal tag team match where Mikey Whipwreck took most of the beating throughout the entire match, Mikey accidentally fell into the ropes, hung up one of the members of the Public Enemy, and after a roll-up pin, Mikey Whipwreck won his first ECW championship without landing one offensive maneuver. Paul Heyman made Mikey Whipwreck play up the idea of being an underdog so much so that they actually had him do his interviews in the complete opposite way that everybody else usually did. Whereas wrestlers would stand in front of the camera and say, "I'm gonna come after you, and I'm gonna take you out, and I'm gonna retain this championship." Mikey Whipwreck's interview style was, "Pitbull number 2, you're gonna kill me out there. My mom told me I shouldn't even wrestle this match." It made Mikey Whipwreck such a sympathetic character. But eventually Mikey let his skills show, and he became one of the biggest stars in ECW. He was one of the first ever guys to ever hold the ECW Triple Crown, winning the World Tag Titles, Television Championship, and ECW World Heavyweight Championship. He mixed it up with the best of the best in ECW. Guys like the Sandman, the franchise Shane Douglas, Cactus Jack, Terry Funk, the Public Enemy. Mikey Whipwreck was the perfect ultimate underdog story, from jobber to champion. And it's one of the best stories ever told. If you ever have time, go back and watch some of the early stuff where Mikey Whipwreck first started out. It's one of the best examples of storytelling you'll ever see. The second person we're going to highlight on this underdog episode is Sami Zayn. Now, a lot of people knew of Sami Zayn from the independent circuit. As a matter of fact, these rumors are unfounded, but some people actually thought that he was El Generico, who was actually a really good friend with Kevin Steen, who became Kevin Owens in NXT. And that's where this story takes place. Sami Zayn started off in NXT as a talented grappler who everybody wanted to see to be elevated to the top. At NXT Arrival, Sami Zayn had one of the best matches of the year against then Antonio Cesaro. While allegedly Sami Zayn had worked with Cesaro on the independent circuit, the former Claudio Castagnoli, there was no doubt that Sami Zayn and Cesaro had something magical whenever they tied up in the ring. And at NXT Arrival, Sami Zayn and Cesaro put on a classic, but Sami Zayn came up on the losing end. And that was a story that was told all throughout NXT television until Sami got a big win, and then another one, and then another one. And it seemed that Sami Zayn was poised to break to the top of NXT. And who stood in his way? A young man by the name of Adrian Neville, who we now know as Pac. Neville was the WWE NXT Heavyweight Champion at the time, and in the middle of a great run after beating Bo Dallas in an unbelievable ladder match to claim that championship. Sami Zayn and Neville were both very well liked, but the sympathetic favorite was Sami Zayn. Sami Zayn had been built up so well as the underdog from the underground that all the NXT crowd wanted to see was Sami Zayn become the NXT champion. And with a wipe of his face and a haluva kick to the jaw, Sami Zayn defeated Neville. And the underdog from the underground claimed the NXT championship. But the NXT booking committee wasn't done there, because while Sami Zayn finally won the big championship, his celebration was cut completely short by a debuting Kevin Owens, who laid out a man that he considered one of his best friends in the wrestling business and started them on a collision course where Sami Zayn only defended his NXT championship at an NXT pay-per-view show one time in a losing effort to Kevin Owens. But you can't take away the story that was told. Sami Zayn was one of the best underdogs in the history of NXT and in the history of professional wrestling. The final underdog that I'll talk about today is one that we all know and love, Daniel Bryan. Despite the fact that Daniel Bryan may be one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, and Mikey Whipwreck was one of my favorite ECW wrestlers, and I love Sami Zayn and his gimmick right now, I'm not highlighting these superstars specifically because of how I feel about them, but how well they were booked in their role as an underdog. Daniel Bryan had a great background. We knew of his toiling in indie obscurity to an indie master to an indie legend in the 12 years that he was in different promotions like Ring of Honor. Then the WWE finally signed Daniel Bryan. And after Bryan Danielson debuted as Daniel Bryan on WWE NXT, not the NXT we know and love, but the game show that saw people get eliminated each week, everybody thought that it was a lock that Daniel Bryan was going to be the one to win the first ever NXT, but he was eliminated. But he came back with the Nexus in one of the best television segments in the history of wrestling, and then he was fired. But then he came back in a huge tag team match, and all seemed like Daniel Bryan was poised to start taking over. He had a big win over The Miz for the United States Championship, the man who was his pro. How egregious were us, the internet wrestling fans, that The Miz was looked at as the pro against Daniel Bryan, a professional wrestling master. But it told a great story. A story that wouldn't stop being told even after Daniel Bryan had to retire and come back. But then for a while, Daniel Bryan seemed to take a back seat. He was put in different storylines and put with different people. It never seemed to really highlight Daniel Bryan until he won Money in the Bank and won his first ever WWE World Heavyweight Championship, which he lost at WrestleMania in about 15 seconds. This led to Daniel Bryan becoming one of the most over professional wrestlers in the history of wrestling with his Yes movement. Daniel Bryan would go on to take on Bray Wyatt at the Royal Rumble and start a wave of momentum where everybody wanted to only see Daniel Bryan in the main event of WrestleMania. The problem was that the main event was already set. We knew that Batista was going to take on Randy Orton for the WWE Championship. But Daniel Bryan would not be stopped. And it turns out that he had to take on Triple H in the opening match of the night at WrestleMania just to get a chance at being the third man in a triple threat match later that night in the main event of WrestleMania. And defying all odds, Daniel Bryan stood tall, holding up the World Heavyweight Championships, and the Yes movement was in full effect. There was no better feeling at that moment for every wrestling fan. They were elated that WrestleMania 30 ended with Daniel Bryan, a man who had been ridiculed by Triple H, called a B-plus player, told he wasn't good enough, told that he would never make it to the pinnacle of professional wrestling, hold the WWE Championships over his head, and be recognized as the only world champion at that time in the WWE. Daniel Bryan's underdog story was better than almost anybody else's. Could have been written by Hollywood. Daniel Bryan is a perfect example of how great the underdog can work in professional wrestling. Hope you guys enjoyed this walk down memory lane. And maybe you guys can just go back on the network and relive some of these moments. Mikey Whipwreck, Sami Zayn, and Daniel Bryan are just 3 examples of a character that professional wrestling has used for years, the underdog. These were 3 of my personal favorites. Comment below and tell me who were some of yours and some of your favorite moments from Mikey Whipwreck, Sami Zayn, and Daniel Bryan's career. Until next time, this has been Albert Albanese on The Slam Session.